привет! Hello zusammen, hello everybody, and welcome to the job application training by Stex. My name is Valerie Barkova. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Stex Ukraine, the sister company of German freight forwarder Stex GmbH, which is successfully working on the European market since year 2017. At Stex, we pay special attention to our team, which consists of professionals with a proper set of mind, ready to impress at every turn. As you may have found out from the description, this live workshop provides the tools you need to succeed at a written application and at job interviews in order to land your desired position in an international organization. After completing this seminar, you will know how to make your application stand out from the crowd and to feel confident about your performance at the job interview. So, we'll be talking about stuff which is extremely relative and common to anybody who have ever thought about getting a really high level and well-paid position at a big international company. And the workshop will be conducted by the Stex's Director of Training and Development with 10 plus years of experience both as a university lecturer and in the Tallinn University, as well as a hiring manager in Germany, Estonia and Romania, Mr. Björn Stürmer. So, I would like to ask you to take a proper place at our stage.
First of all, thank you very much for the kind remarks and the nice introduction, Valerie, and a very warm welcome also from my side today to our live event here, job application training from beautiful Odessa, Ukraine. Valerie already introduced me very well, so I'm not gonna talk much about myself. You see my name on the whiteboard. You have a little bit information about me and what we're going to do in the description box of this video, but first and foremost, this event should be about you. It should help you how to improve your skills when it comes to job applications, when it comes to find your dream job or land the job you want. And in that sense, I'm not gonna talk much more about myself rather than about the event today and what we are going to do. But let me first start with a few remarks why we decided to have such an event, have such an application training. Stex Ukraine is operating for around half a year now, and we have been hiring more or less 15 employees during that short amount of time. So we are still constantly hiring, and you can imagine that we are receiving dozens and dozens, actually hundreds of job applications during this process. And myself, in the last 10 years, I have been working for different companies in different countries. I have seen job applications in different languages, hundreds and hundreds of them. And well, I can probably comfortably say that I have seen it all. And we have seen a lot of applications also here in our Odessa office that were not ideal, to be mild. Some were very good, we hired these people of course, but some were not exactly what you want to see as a hiring manager. And that's why we decided to give some input, to give some guidelines how to improve your job application and therefore improve your chances to get the job you want. So what is it about today? You can see on the whiteboard I have a PowerPoint presentation prepared for you, but just to make that clear right in the beginning, what I'm not going to do is, I'm not going to do showing you hundreds of slides and giving you templates for your CV or for your job application, cover letter, because if you're looking for templates, you can go to Google, right? It's all there, we have all done it, everybody has seen it, there are hundreds of different options, most of them are okay, most of them are good, but the thing is not to copy-paste some standard phrases from the internet that everybody else uses and every hiring manager like I am has seen hundreds or even thousands of times. Today it's more about giving you the insights where you can improve, what most people are doing wrong. And if you don't do these things wrong, you can actually stand out and therefore have a better chance to get invited to a job interview. And if you make that step, then you're already much closer to landing the job in the end. So don't expect many slides, it's more of a talking points for me. Don't expect any templates that you can just print out or fill your data in, but rather listen, make notes if you can, and first and foremost also ask questions in the end, because if we look at the structure of today's event, then We will pretty much speak about the job application process, written application. Nowadays it's of course mainly online or via email. And if you make it to the job interview, then that's the next important step where you actually have to confirm the good impression that you made with your application in the first place. And in the end, I think the most important part of this event is the QA session. So I want you to ask any and all questions that you have during the event. After the event, we will show you now the email address in the description box below and also in the video where you can send in your questions right now and through the course of this live stream. And then in the end, Valerie will come back and read those questions out to me. For me, that's the most exciting part, of course, because I don't know what you're going to ask. I hope I can answer all of it. But anyway, it's up to you. If you will have 3 questions or 30 questions or 100 questions, I promise you we will answer them all and hopefully give you something that you can actually work on and improve your job application skills. But let's start with my first point here, the job application itself. It's pretty standard common knowledge. You all know that a job application, what is it? What is a job? What is an application? Well, we all have to work, make some money, right? And in the best case scenario, we do something we like, we do something we can earn a good living with. And in order to get such a job, you have to put some effort in first in your application in order to actually compete with all of the other applicants that are there. And an application is actually nothing else than a description of the particular tasks you are able to carry out, about your motivation, why you want this job, maybe more than others, why you are a better fit, a better choice for the employer to hire you. And usually applications are a response to certain job ads that you find nowadays on the internet, in the old days in the newspaper. But of course there's also an option for a speculative application. So you might send in a job application to a job that hasn't even been posted somewhere, because you just think, I want to work in this company, and maybe they have something, if not today, maybe in a month or in a year, and might hire you then. So we will get to this special question of speculative applications later on, if it's something that actually makes sense, how much promising it is or not, if you should do it or not. We'll get to that later, but first of all, we are talking about the standard job application where you are responding to a certain job advertisement that you have found online or where you have heard about it, that there is a job opening, etc. So the application usually consists of a cover letter, a CV, sometimes a so-called third page or motivation letter. I'll get to that point, what it exactly is, and if we need it. It's a pretty controversial topic, but in any case, there should be an appendix as well, where you add your certificates or your diplomas from a university or references from previous jobs, etc. We will also speak about the question of the application photo. Should you include a photo, a picture of yourself to your job application, yes or no? If you do it, which kind of photo should it be? And I will also give you some insights from the employer's perspective, what it means to receive dozens or hundreds of job applications, what are the common mistakes and which you can hopefully avoid in the future and then have better chances. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we have different kind of applications. The written one, that's a little bit old school. Nowadays, I don't think many people expect you to actually send a paper application, but it still happens. But much more common, of course, is the email or online variant of application, either through email or through a certain job portal where you can fill in a form, etc. And then the speculative application, as I mentioned, will be also discussed. Before we start with the cover letter, which is the first page of your application usually, or actually the email text when you send it via email, I want to also stress that, of course, this event goes on for a few hours and you don't have to sit in front of your computer all that time. We will have some breaks, 2 short 10-minute breaks towards a little bit in the beginning and the end, and then 20 minutes break somewhere in the middle of the presentation. So don't worry, you will not have to sit in front of this live stream throughout the whole time. I will tell you when the breaks will be, but let's start with the cover letter first. So the cover letter basically is your first impression, either on paper or if you send it in email, it's the email text itself, where you introduce yourself, where you address the employer, where you describe your motivation, where you of course have to mention which job you're actually applying for and why you would be the right person, the right fit for this job opening. One simple rule, maybe I write that down, for the cover letter is the KISS rule. I don't know if you've heard about it, has nothing to do with kissing, it just means keep it short and simple. Don't write there pages and pages of text, keep it maximum to one A4 page, make your points, describe your qualification, tell us what you have been doing so far, what is your work experience, why are you qualified for this job, and try to avoid standard phrasings. Something like you find on the internet, you are highly detail oriented. It's in 90% of all applications, everybody is detail oriented. Or you're good at teamwork. Well, you might be or you might not, I can't check that anyway, but it's written in almost every application and it a little bit shows that this is just some copy-paste that everybody else writes. And if you do that, you don't stand out. You more have a chance to stand out if you actually write a tailor-made cover letter where you refer to the company you're applying to, make the effort to find out who is your contact person, who is the HR manager or the CEO. Don't just write, ladies and gentlemen, or to whom it may concern, etc. It just seems like a duplicate of one and the same text that you send to everybody else. Make it personal, make it tailor-made for the company and for the job you are applying to. If you have some special qualification, like you're very good in certain tools, or you have some Microsoft certificates, or you have a certain driving license that's important for that job, you should also mention it right here already. If you're applying for an office job, you don't have to talk about your driving license because it's pretty much irrelevant. But if you apply for a job where a driving license is an asset, please write it already in your cover letter. You also need to adapt your language a little bit. Of course, cover letters should be pretty much formal because you're applying for a job. It's not an email you send to your friends or family, but still there is a little bit of room for adjustment. It's a different thing if you apply to a young startup company with a few employees where you know most of the people are in their 20s or 30s, or if you apply to a large international serious organization, let's say a bank or something like this, you should be more formal in this case rather than in the first example. And one thing which I think is the first important note to make, which you might not have expected or which you haven't heard yet so far, I've only presented you pretty obvious things, but don't use excessive conditional. So conditional tense in English, something like, I would like to be your new office manager, or I would be happy if you invite me for the job interview. It's not a good style. Just be direct, straightforward, and tell the hiring manager in the end, I'm looking forward to meeting you at the job interview. Don't use conditional tense. And it goes without saying, of course, that you should never use any slang language in any part of your application, not in the cover letter, not on the CV, not on the third page. Just never use any slang. Use your official language. Make sure that you are writing everything correctly, no misspellings, no grammatic errors, and the like. But let's look at the second page in your application portfolio, which usually is the CV, or some people call it resume. So basically an overview of your biographical data. Who are you? When are you born? Where are you born? What is your citizenship? What's your name? What's your contact information? And most importantly, what have you actually done so far in your life? Who are you in terms of what is your professional qualification? Do you have a high school degree, or do you have a university degree, or vocational education? Which work experience do you have? What was your last employer, the employer before that, etc. So there are different templates, and I told you earlier I'm not going to provide you any templates. Most of them are okay. You find them online. They are in a chronological order. Either you start from the newest state first or from the older state first. Doesn't really matter. Both is acceptable nowadays. And most important, of course, is that you add everything so that there aren't any huge gaps. If you have gaps, I'll get to that point later, because it's probably the most important thing to speak about when we're talking about CVs, if there are some months or even years where you can't actually explain what you have been doing during that time. Also, if you have been serving in the military or you have any alternative service or some volunteering work, definitely add it there, because first of all, it makes a good impression usually, and also it explains what you have been doing during that time, as I said, to avoid the gaps in the CV. When it comes to your school education, please only add your highest school degree. We really don't care where you have been in primary school or middle school or whatever. Important thing is, have you finished school after 10th grade, 12th grade? Do you have a high school degree, gymnasium or whatever? So only add your highest school degree and don't go back to the age of 6 or whenever you first went to school or kindergarten. But let's speak a little bit about the gaps, because these, once again, are pretty standard knowledge. I think most of it you have heard before. But what to do if you have some gaps in your CV? What have you done after school? Maybe you went traveling for a year. You didn't really work during that time. Maybe you had some, I don't know, health issue for a longer time. That's why you haven't been working. Or maybe you just won the lottery and you didn't want to do anything for 2 years. It's all right. It's all fine. Some people have it, some people don't. Some have a very straightforward CV where everything can be explained from the first day until today. But if there are some gaps, it's important to actually explain them. You can do that in your cover letter already, or you can actually include it into your CV as a sabbatical year, for instance, or a year of finding yourself traveling, whatsoever. It's much better to read that than to think, what was the person doing? Was he in prison or was he in some mental institution during that time? So don't leave any gaps unexplained. It's always better to be open and honest about them. Or if you really have been in prison, maybe make something up. I don't want to say that as a hiring manager, but well, if you write that you were in prison, then I don't think you will have much chances to be invited to the job interview. You can say it later on, because honesty still is the most important in this business or in any business. But again, try to avoid time gaps. And if you have some, you have to be able to explain them, because latest in the job interview, although your chances are smaller to even make it there if you don't explain them right away, latest in the job interview, the HR person or the hiring manager will ask you, what have you been doing? And if you only then start to make something up in your mind, it's probably too late. Let's talk next about the so-called third page, or the motivation letter. I mentioned earlier that it's a somewhat new thing. Well, it's not that new actually. It started to appear in the 1990s. But still, until today, it's not really common. It depends a little bit on the country or the environment where you are applying for a job. And I tell you honestly, some hiring managers, and I agree with that, find it quite unnecessary. Most of the time, there are exceptions. But it's controversial. Let's maybe first talk about what is it actually. So when I talked to you about the cover letter, I explained that this is the place where you should indicate your motivation. All right. Some people think a few lines within the cover letter is not enough. You want to tell more about yourself. You want to explain in detail why you think that you are the right person for that job and nobody else is. All right, you can do so if you really have something to say. If you just copy-paste, once again, some phrases you found somewhere online that somebody else has written, instead of you should probably just skip it, because once again, I have seen it hundreds of times. It's always the same phrases, the same qualifications, detail-oriented, teamwork, etc., what I told you before. If you have nothing else to say than this, just leave it. Just skip it. There's no point in wasting your time, wasting our time, if you have nothing else to say what you have not already outlined in your cover letter. But if you do, if you really have a lot of qualification, a lot of experience, a lot of motivation, because you really think this is the job that you're born for, then please add your motivation letter, your third page, but try to avoid to sound like a robot that just repeats what everybody else has already saying. Well, what does it mean, order of the portfolio? I basically already said that your cover letter should come first. After that, you put your CV. After that, you put your motivation letter, if applicable. And in the end, all of your appendixes, like your school diplomas, your Microsoft qualifications, your references from previous employers, and similar. Application photo. One of my favorite topics because I think it's super controversial nowadays if you should add a photo or picture of yourself to your application or not. I know that there are different opinions and I accept that. Is it even necessary? In the end, it's up to you because it depends on where do you apply, I mean which country, which are the standards and norms in this country nowadays. I can tell, for instance, my home country, originally Germany, although I haven't been living there for more than 10 years, it's not anymore allowed actually for an employer to require a photo on your application. If they write that into the job ad, they can get into a lot of trouble legally, so they don't write it, but still people do apply with a photo, and I think that's the right way to do, because think about it. What harm can be done? Or if you would be in our shoes, if you would be the person who would look through many different applications, and you have some with a photo and some without. Okay, if it's a very bad photo, and I will get to that, then it's of course better to not attach any. But if it's a good professional photo from a photographer where you actually show additionally that you put effort into this application, that you really want that job, why not? There's nothing to lose. It's not a beauty contest here, but still people want to see who they are hiring. They will see it anyway when they invite you to the job interview, and I don't see any issues here with discrimination or similar, and I can just advise you to add the photo whenever possible if it is not exactly against the standards or norms in the industry or country you are applying for the job. But of course it's important to not make some certain mistakes. Please don't use photos from Facebook or from your last beach vacation. Don't use photos from a photo booth where you usually get this, I don't know, $5 passport photos from. It doesn't look professional, it doesn't look good. Treat yourself, get a professional photographer, have a nice photo session, and then you can use these photos for a number of years. Of course, it should be more or less up to date. Please don't use any photos from 10 or 20 years ago where nobody will recognize you anymore, but make a professional photo shoot, and that can definitely make a difference for you to be invited to the job interview or not. Where should you attach the application photo? You can do it either on the cover letter or on the CV. I prefer on the CV if you do it electronically, because it's just easier to insert it there. But once again, don't use any scanned photos or any low quality photos. Do it professionally, and then it will give you a nice advantage. I also promised you earlier that I will give you a little bit of an insight from the employer's perspective from the last 10 years of my experience, but also in particular the experience here in Ukraine so far with the applications we have received. And I must say there's a little bit of a difference. The main problem we noticed here in Ukraine is that we receive applications that are simply incomplete. There's either only a CV or only some email, or there's no work experience mentioned in the CV, or it's not at all tailor-made, as I said in the beginning. It's just a random copy-paste application that probably has been sent to 5, 10, 20 different jobs, all the same. So this is the main problem here. But if I look back at my long experience and think of what was the most problematic of the all, and which you also, of course, should avoid, then I just went through the last 25, 30 applications I have seen outside of Ukraine, before Ukraine. And one thing I noticed in these 25 to 30 applications, I have to take my notes now to quote you the right numbers, that 100%, so all of them, had misspellings or grammatical errors in them. And more than 90% of these applications had at least 3 such mistakes, either spelling, misspelling, or comma or grammar mistakes, etc. Many of these mistakes actually could have been avoided if you just use a simple spell checker in Microsoft Word or whatever formatting program you use. More than half of these applications had formatting issues. It just didn't look good. You know, there was spaces where they didn't belong. There was no space between different parts of the application, so it just didn't look good at all. About 1/3, actually a little bit more than 1/3 of these applications did not include a cell phone number, a mobile phone number of the applicant. Almost a third did not indicate if they have a driver license or which kind of driver license they have, although for the certain job they applied to, it would have been necessary to provide this information. Now I get to a little bit more less likely or less often happening mistakes, but still 15% of the applications misspelled their own address. And also 15% did not spell correctly or copied wrong the name of the company or the name of the hiring manager they applied to. And I guess it goes without saying that you should not make these mistakes. If it's 100% that have misspellings in their application and you are the only one who doesn't, then you stand out. If everybody else provides incomplete applications without a cover letter, without a CV, or with some important information missing, but you don't, then you stand out. What should you do? You definitely should, once you're done with your cover letter, with your CV, with your whole application, print it out. Why should you do that? Because if you print something out and you have it on paper in front of you, you will find mistakes more easily than if you only check it on your screen. You definitely should also give your CV, your cover letter, your application to somebody else to read it through, to proofread it. Somebody who is very strong at language, who has a perfect command of grammar, who knows where to put punctuation and where not. So give it to somebody else to double check your skills, and then you have a better chance not to make any mistakes. What does it mean, workforce as commodity? When we are looking at hiring somebody from an employer's perspective, then, well, in the beginning I said, yes, everybody of us has to earn money and make a living, but for the employer, workforce is also always an investment. It's something that costs actually a lot of money, because it's not only the salary you receive, let's say $500 or $1,000 or whatever, there's also on top social insurance, there's tax, so it costs much more for the employer than just the salary you receive. And if you count it, let's say $1,000 per 1 year, that's $12,000. In 5 years, it's $60,000. So your workforce is a very expensive commodity. And if you want to advertise this expensive commodity, you should do it in a professional and in an outstanding manner. And one more problem that happens more often than not, I just mentioned it already in the statistics, how many people don't include their telephone number in their application. Well, even if they do, availability after you send in your application is often a huge problem. If you want to be invited to the job interview, or if you want to get the job, you have to be reachable. You have to be, contactable, either via your phone or via email. Make sure that responses from potential employers don't end up in your spam folder. If you miss a call, please call back. Don't wait for somebody to call you again if you maybe don't know the number. It might be your next employer, and you might miss out on your dream job if you're not available. So next slide actually is about the different application types, which we already briefly introduced earlier, but I actually forgot one thing that I don't want to leave out. And you see, this is a live broadcast, so it can easily happen that I skip something, but now I luckily remembered about the appendix. We spoke about the appendix, about your qualification, etc. If it really happens that you're sending a written application, which is rare nowadays, but it's still possible, please never send in any original diplomas or original documents. It has been common many years ago, but nowadays I wouldn't be sure if you ever get these originals back. So normal uncertified copies are all right, and if your employer or future employer really wants to see the originals, then you can bring them with you in the job interview. Which also is part of this appendix, or, well, in the end of your application are previous job references. So if you have been working somewhere else where you have a contact, an HR manager or your previous direct manager who can say something about you, it's very good to include those job references, 1 or 2, maybe the last 2, in your application already with the relevant contact details, because make no mistake, we will anyway research you. We will check you on Facebook, we will check you on social media, we will check where you have worked before, and if we have an opportunity, we will also contact your previous managers to find out more about you, because we don't know who we hire, and it's much easier to get as much possibility and as much information beforehand rather than finding out later that actually the two sides don't match. So if you have reference from your previous employers, include the contacts and also speak to these people already that they know they might be contacted. It happens to me sometimes that I get contacted by companies about inquiring about certain employees I have been working with 5, 6, 7 years ago. I hardly remember them, and then I should say something out of the blue about their performance or how they were doing. So it's important that the person who you mentioned there actually knows about it, agrees to it, and then you have a good possibility to give your future, hopefully future employer an option to inquire about you. I also tell you it doesn't really matter what they say, because, you know, I want to have my own impression. I want to make my own judgment. The only thing, if I really call somebody from your previous job and they tell me that you have been stealing or that there was some criminal case with you or whatever, or you're coming late every second day, these are really bad no-goes, but everything else I can't be sure if it's true or not. If they tell me you have been the best employee they ever had, then I wonder why you're not working there anymore. Or if they tell me that you have been absolutely horrible, but you have been working there for many years, it also doesn't add up. So it's not extremely important, it's more an opportunity for us, for your future employer, to exclude the most problematic cases that could be, as I said, some criminal cases or something like this. But okay, that's about the appendix and the references from previous employers. Let's now look through the different types of applications. I have already mentioned the written application isn't that common anymore today as it was maybe still 10, certainly 20 years ago. But if you do it, well, then all the same rules apply. It's of course the most expensive and most, well, how to say, difficult or demanding way of applying to a job. To do it in writing, on paper, you have to use a proper paper quality, you have to use a proper printer, not the cheapest, not what looks bad, don't have any folds in it, of course. But yeah, I mean, I really doubt, or at least don't know, many occasions where written applications are still common today. It's much more the email or online or maybe even phone application. When it's via email, then keep in mind that the email text itself is already your cover letter. You do not have to attach the cover letter as an additional PDF file, which some people do, and then it looks a bit weird because the same thing in the email text as well as in the cover letter. PDF file is a good talking point because don't attach any strange formats that nobody can open. Please don't attach huge files. 2 megabytes usually should be the maximum for each attachment, and keep it in PDF wherever possible. Email application as well as written application, as well as any application, once again, keep it accurate, accurate, accurate. Avoid any misspellings, avoid any grammar mistakes, avoid any other mistakes by calling a different company than what you are actually applying to or anything like that, because then you just waste your time and other people's time, and that makes no sense whatsoever. When it comes to the email application, one important thing is also that you use a legitimate and professional email address, which could be, for instance, your first name dot last name at gmail or hotmail.com. Please don't use something like this. It's a real example, not a long time ago. So sexybunny96 at gmail.com wasn't invited to the job interview, as you can imagine, and therefore didn't get a job. So keep it professional. Don't use your fun email address that you usually use with your friends or that you maybe have created when you were a little bit younger and which you don't find that funny yourself anymore, but make it professional and use an email address that refers to you as a person and to your first and last name usually. Are email applications common nowadays? Well, I can tell you that already in year 2005, a research study in Germany, France, and Switzerland showed that more than 50%, 2005, which is almost 20 years ago, were willing to accept email applications and would even prefer online or email applications rather than written ones. And if this was 20 years ago, then it's pretty clear that today this number must be much, much higher. What should you write in the subject line of your email, well, obviously you should write application for office manager position or application for accountant position at Stex Ukraine or wherever else you are applying. Make it already clear in your subject line what this is about, so we can easily filter and direct those emails where they belong. As always, don't use any standard phrases, as I have mentioned so many times before, but it can't actually be mentioned often enough because it really happens all the time. Also, because just because you're applying online or via email, don't think you're in a usual internet environment and don't use things like this. So, in my opinion, or LOL or whatever, all of these internet abbreviations that we use in Messenger or chat have no place in a professional job application. And you might think I'm joking, but I'm not. I have seen it, and not only once. And last but not least, in today's event, in this first block, I come back to what I mentioned earlier, the speculative application, where you actually apply, although there was no job offered. Is it something that makes sense? Should you do it, and in which circumstances? It can make sense. It is less likely to be successful in the end because usually companies, if they need somebody, I told you earlier, workforce is an expensive commodity. So we wouldn't just hire somebody just because we want to hire somebody. We hire people if we need them. And if a company needs somebody, they usually look for the people they need and have relevant job advertisements available. But sometimes people are just so good or so qualified or so fitting to our organization or to somebody's organization that we would want to hire them in any case, even if we maybe don't need them now that much, but we know we will need them in the future. So it can make sense, but it is less likely to be successful, and it also can look a little bit desperate if you send speculative applications everywhere all the time, maybe multiple times to the same employer. Don't do that, because if they ever have a real job application available, or a real job offer rather, then they will remember you, that you were the one who already sent 20 speculative applications. But if you do it in situations where you are extremely valuable for this company, let's say Stex Ukraine, maybe we don't look for a dispatcher or for a new colleague in our team right now, but you are a German and English-speaking person living in Odessa with experience in the transport industry. If you apply, you have a very good chance to be hired, no matter if we need you now or not, because in the future it will be very difficult to find such a person when we then actually need it. So if you are extremely qualified, or if you think that you are special fit for a certain organization, you might even apply without a job opening advertised, but keep in mind, chances are lower to be invited, and it only makes sense if you have something special to offer. That's pretty much it for the first block of our presentation of our live event today. We will now go on a 10 minutes coffee break, and then we will be back and we'll be talking about the job interview process. Thank you. Welcome back to our second part of today's live job application training here at STEX Ukraine. We have so far been speaking about how to write a successful application, how to write a cover letter, a CV, and how to address the employer online via email or whatnot. And now the second part we want to cover is the job interview. Before I get to that, please let me remind you that in the end, after this section, we will have our Q&A session. Most important part today, that you send in your questions, and they will be later broadcasted to me by Valerie, and I will answer them here at the spot. So the more questions you ask, the more I have to answer later on, and this is actually all about you, how much you want to get out of this event today. But first, let's speak now about the job interview. And the very first basic thing about job interview is that you should be happy if you're invited to one, because it means you have been doing something very right. You have been selected among probably many different applications, and if you're at this point, it's a good sign, and now you only have to confirm this good impression that you have already made during the job interview. I have a few talking points here on my PowerPoint. I'm not sure if I go through all of them in this order, but first I want to talk about the dress code, because that's something that's always asked. How should we dress when we go to the job interview? Is there a certain dress code? Do I have to wear a suit? Do I have to wear a tie? Can I use whatever else I feel comfortable with? Well, that's probably the most important point. You should feel comfortable, because you will be nervous anyway. That's totally natural. It's a stressful situation, and if somebody isn't nervous at all before or during a job interview, that probably just means that he or she doesn't care. So feeling comfortable is the first important advice I can give you when it comes to your dress code. But of course, you shouldn't go extreme. It depends very much on where you're actually applying. Is it an office position? If it's maybe a position in a bank where it's extremely formal or particularly strict, there you should probably wear a suit, you should probably wear a tie. If you apply for a position as a construction worker, it would be quite silly to appear in an evening dress code at such a job interview. But once again, in the end, you should be comfortable, wear what you feel good with, and don't try to be super fancy, just be normal, just be regular. Just as I am today, that's totally fine for most occasions, unless it's, as I said, maybe some higher managerial position or some environment like banks, insurance companies, where a certain dress code is always required anyway. Basically, you could say you can wear the kind of dress code you would also wear in your daily work life when you actually start a job in this company. But don't go extreme, don't come in your tracksuit, don't come with some, I don't know, especially provocative shirts. Or I give you an example, it's many years ago, I think almost 10 years ago that it actually happened, but I still remember it because it was so bizarre. It was actually in a bank where the requirements for dress code are particularly high, and we had a young woman coming to the job interview with a black t-shirt and a silver glitter writing "bitch" on her chest. So you might understand it's not exactly what we were expecting. It was quite funny, I still remember it today, but to nobody's surprise, she was not hired. Not only for that reason, but anyway, that's not how you want to present yourself. Just be normal, just be how you feel comfortable. When should you arrive to the job interview? Also a question that is asked very often. Of course, you should never be late. Sometimes we can't change the fact that we're in a traffic jam, or that the train didn't come, or that there just something happened that you're late. Then you have to inform the employer that you will be late and ask them if they actually still want to see you. If it's just a couple of minutes, might be okay. If it's hours, then maybe the whole thing needs to be rescheduled. But the idea obviously should be to be in time. But there's one thing that is at least as bad as being late, and that is being way too early. If you have an appointment for 1 o'clock, don't come there at 12:30, because the hiring manager or whoever is welcoming you there might not be prepared yet. Maybe they have another job interview still ongoing or something else to do. Just be a little bit early, just a few minutes. If it's a huge building where you don't know exactly where the entrance is, You can arrive at the location early enough to find everything out, but only announce yourself as being present a few minutes before the actual interview time, and that's the perfect solution for the question when to arrive to the interview. But what will happen during the interview? Well, I can't tell you for sure because every hiring manager has different opinions. It's the same about how a job application should look like, how a CV should look like. If you ask 3 different managers, you probably get at least 3, maybe 4 or 5 different answers. But in my opinion and in my experience, a good manager knows that most people who come to a job interview are somewhat nervous, somewhat in a stressful situation. So usually it starts with a few easy questions, a little bit of small talk. How did you find our office? How are you doing today? Etc. But then quite quickly we will move on to your self-introduction because we have a limited amount of time. Usually a job interview lasts for, 30 minutes, maybe 1 hour maximum. And during this short amount of time, the company needs to know as much as possible about you because maybe even after this job interview, they already make the decision whether to offer you a job, whether to hire you or not. Self-introduction sounds easy, but is not always that easy because it means that you have to know your CV, you have to know your cover letter. Everything that you have written about yourself should be true, of course, but if you can't elaborate on these details, if you don't remember when you went to school, if you don't actually know for how long you worked at your second employer before the one you just work right now, it doesn't make a good impression. So you must be very firm, very knowledgeable about yourself. You must be able to present yourself not only in the written form that you have done already successfully, otherwise you wouldn't be at the interview, but you have to be able to freely speak about yourself. After the self-introduction part, usually there are some standard questions that repeat in almost every job interview. Of course, they will ask you, why did you apply for this job? Why do you think you're qualified for this job? Why do you want to leave your current job if you are currently employed somewhere else? Or why did you leave your last job if you are currently unemployed? It's very predictable that you will be asked these questions, and you should do your homework and be prepared and know what to say to these standard questions. Also, they might ask you about your strengths and weaknesses, or nowadays we call it potentials. Where can you improve, or what are you doing already very well? 10 years ago, this was in each and every job interview. It is a little bit less nowadays because there's so many default answers on the internet to these questions that we have heard them all, but still be prepared for the question, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses or potentials? And when you talk about weaknesses, always try to find something that is actually a strength, because we don't really want to hear about your real weaknesses. We will find them out sooner or later. But if you can present something that sounds like a weakness but is actually a strength, that's a pretty good plus point to make. One example, if you say that you're very detail-oriented, as they all are, because they all write it in their job applications, and if you say that you are always a person who wants to achieve 100% accuracy, even if it means to put in some extra hours or overwork or whatever, that's usually a pretty good thing to say when it's not actually a weakness. But there can be some delicate questions as well, which you might not be prepared for and which you might not necessarily expect. And it's controversial if it's even allowed or if it's, let's say, ethically acceptable to ask such questions, but they surely are asked. So I want to at least cover it a little bit here, especially for female candidates or female applicants. You might be asked about your family planning, you might be asked about your relationship situation, if you're going to have a child soon or if you have such plans. Well, I personally think it's inappropriate to ask these things. Still, I know they are usually or regularly asked, and well, if they ask, you have to give some sort of an answer. And as with everything during the application process, it's usually best to be most honest as you can if you are asked such questions. When it comes to religion or political worldview, this is really something no hiring manager should ask you. And here I would even advise you not to answer these questions because it's nobody's business. And even if that gives you some sort of a minus point in the job application process, so be it. Maybe the manager actually only asks these questions to see how you react to it, if you're willing to share anything, or if you also can make a point to say, I'm not going to answer this kind of question. And yeah, obviously don't make any religious or political comments about whatever situation is going on in the news yourself, because you never know where is your counterpart standing in certain political questions, and it's better to not get involved in any of that during a job interview process. One more thing, I want to come back to the dress code. I actually forgot it once again. I remembered it just as we speak and don't want to skip it altogether. For the men, guys, come to the job interview with a shaved beard, unless you have some full beard, stylish full beard. Go and make the effort and shave before the job interview, otherwise it makes a little bit of a dirty impression and we don't want to see that. But what is not written on my slides, but actually important, and I want to cover it briefly, is the situation when the hiring manager will ask you if you have any questions about the job, about the company. And what very often happens is that the applicants apparently are not prepared for that at all, and they don't know what to say and they have no questions. That is not good. And one question you can always ask, no matter where you apply for or what you apply for, is why is this position vacant? Has the person previously been fired, or has he left himself? Or is it a new position? Because that's something I would want to know, especially if the person was fired. Why was he fired, and would I be the next one? So something you can always ask is, why is this position open? Is it a new position, or what happened to your potential predecessor? And another thing you will come across at some point, there's no way how not to cover it, is your salary expectation. Sometimes employers or companies already write in a job ad what is the salary they're offering, then it's easy because you know from the very beginning what you are talking about and if it's suitable for you, but sometimes it's not. So you can already actually include that into your job application. It's not rude, it's not problematic to write in your cover letter what is your personal expectation for this job, how much have you been earning before, how much do you want to earn, because if these numbers, what you want to earn and what the company is willing to pay, don't match up at all, then why should we waste our time? If you want to earn $2,000 but they only can offer $1,000, then how good you might be, you probably won't get the 2,000 and you will not be happy with 1,000, so just drop it. But yeah, if you don't cover it in your application already, or if the company hasn't yet introduced you with the number they are willing to pay, then latest here during the job interview, when you ask your own questions, you should come up with a number. And usually, if they haven't announced themselves what they are willing to pay, they want to hear from you what you are expecting. And it's actually not a big deal. Unless you're applying maybe to a very, very small company, a family business or something, they might want to hear how much you want to earn because they maybe can pay you less than they were willing to pay. But in most bigger international companies, and that's what we are talking today about, how to make an international career, they know what they're willing to pay. They usually pay the same people or the people in the same positions the same amount. So no matter what you say, you will not be offered less just because you asked for less. You can ask what you find realistic, what you really want to earn. You can also include what you have been earning before and that you maybe don't want to earn less, or that you're even willing to earn a little bit less because you find this position and company so attractive. That's something I actually always find quite impressive, if people are honestly willing to earn less because they see the potential for themselves in this new organization. So much about the job interview. It might not be the only selection procedures. I only covered today the application itself and the job interview itself, but sometimes there might be a second job interview with different people, maybe a different manager, maybe the department head or team leader who you're going to work with. It's always a good sign if you are invited to next steps, may it be a second interview or a so-called assessment center. Assessment center usually means that there are different candidates who made it to the next round and then they have different tests for you or role plays or whatever. I'm not a huge fan of it because in these assessment centers it's often like this, that the person who screams the loudest is heard the most, and that might not always be the best people to hire. But then again, companies are different and you might face such situations as well. Take it as a good thing. Every step you're invited to means you have been done good or great in the previous step, and you're always one step closer to your dream job. References from previous jobs and managers. Once again, I have covered it a little bit that you should offer them during the written application already or during the online application. It might be that you will be confronted during the job interview with what your previous manager said. Good or bad, once again, try to be as natural and honest and open about what happened as possible. Even if you have been fired or left the previous job not on good terms, it sometimes happens. Sometimes just ideas don't match or people don't fit into a certain organization. It's not the end of the world. Just try to explain honestly why things happened as they happened and why you think they would not repeat in your new potential workplace. We have covered now, I think, the most important questions what comes to the job interview. I'm very excited to hear from you which experiences you have had, which questions you have in the Q&A session. So I once again want to remind you to send in your questions. It's still open, and soon after we will then go through all of your questions. I will get them in live and answer them right away. Of course, I did not cover any and all possible situations that can happen in a job interview because it depends very much on the job you're applying for. It depends very much on the company and who is the hiring manager. But then again, these are some general remarks and things I find valuable for you that can improve you. But most important, if you already made it to the job interview, you made the most important step. Then it's just about you being natural, not being too nervous. I know it's easier said than done, but if you be yourself, you probably get the best out of it. And also keep in mind, once you reach the job interview, everything else what you have done before, your school, your diploma, your previous work experience, it becomes less relevant than it was in the first step. First, it gives you the entry card to make it to the job interview, but then it's all about yourself. Of course, it doesn't become irrelevant if you have a master's degree in whatever, but once the manager sees you and the people see you, they will get their own impression, they will make their own judgments, and everything what you say in this half an hour or 1 hour of job interview is much more important than what is written in your CV or in your application letter itself. So thank you so much for listening until now. Once again, please send in your questions. We have another 20-minute breaks now, which give you the opportunity to ask whatever you want to, and then we will be back with our Q&A session. Thank you. Thank you for staying tuned in, and welcome back to our third and last part. As I said before, probably the most important for me, personally the most exciting part of today's job application training, our Q&A session. You had time throughout my speech to send in your questions via email, and Valerie will now bring me my phone and I will actually read those questions out live. I don't know what you have been asking. I hope I can answer it all as good as possible, and then we will see how it goes. So Valerie, please bring me the phone. Thank you. And if there is no technical hiccups here, you should see the questions also on your screen right now, but I will also read them out loud. So first question, what are the main steps for the building of the right application form? Well, I think this question was probably sent in quite early in my speech, because we should have covered most of this during the first part when we spoke about the job application, but maybe I can repeat the most important points here. It's to be precise, don't make any misspellings, don't have any gaps in your CV, don't use some format that is not matching up. It must look good, it must look professional, use a professional photographer for your CV photo or application photo, and then you should be good to go. Which questions are the most common in the interview? Well, I think we have covered this one as well. The more standard questions and the more delicate ones in the second part of the presentation. But you can, of course, scroll back or dial back, and this application training will stay online for as long as possible, and you can listen to it once again. How to make the positive or a positive impression on the interviewer? That's a good question, partly covered as well. That also shows that the things you were actually interested in the beginning have been well addressed during my speech. But how to make a positive impression is by being yourself, be natural. Don't try to be some sort of an actor or an actress, because unless you're actually really a professional actor and you apply for a job as an actor, then you're probably not a good actor, and it will show. And if you are yourself and if you are genuine and natural, then you will make the most and best possible impression. I studied German philology and I am interested to work in Germany. That's my home country, all right. But basically, I cannot do anything special but speaking. How can I show me and my knowledge from the best side? Well, it's unfortunate that I don't see you right now, because I would really want to address you at the bottom of your heart that you make a big mistake by saying that you only know how to speak German. That's such a huge asset. It's not only German knowledge, that's the knowledge that is super important in many positions in Germany, obviously, but even more abroad. Because if you're abroad, if you're in Ukraine, if you're in Odessa, not everybody can speak fluent German. Not everybody has a degree in German philology, and that might be actually the key asset that opens the door for you for many jobs. So it's not that you only speak German, that's the super important asset, and you should build your application and your career around that knowledge. Is the CV photo the same as for documents, or it can be more live? All right, so what I think you mean is if it's the same as for your passport or ID card. That's what you mean by documents, right? And the answer is not exactly. It's similar because it has a similar format usually. It usually covers only your head, your face, but especially for passports or official documents, you're usually asked to make a neutral facial impression, to look quite serious. For a job application, you can be a little bit more smiley, a little bit more happy, a little bit more positive. So it's not the same. You should not necessarily use the same photo that you might already have for your passport. Once again, make the effort and get a professional photographer who actually should know, if he's a good photographer, what a CV or application picture should look like. It's not exactly the same as for documents. Do you think the outfit is now very important to make the right impression? Once again, we have spoken about it a little bit. It is not important unless you do something very wrong. You're either completely overdressed or completely inappropriately dressed. So as long as you appear natural and as long as you wear something that makes you comfortable, you should be fine. What is the most important part of the CV that the person should work the most? Yeah, it's a good question because everything is important. Maybe not so much the third page or the motivation letter, as I said before, I'm not a big fan of it. But if you ask me what is more important, the CV or the cover letter, the application letter itself, I wouldn't say that one is more or less important than the other. Everything has to match up, everything has to be a fit altogether. And important, well, they must be as good as possible. There shouldn't be any gaps in your CV, or at least they should be explained. Maybe the CV is a little bit more important because the application letter, as much as you try it tailor-made, is somewhat a standard thing. Your CV, however, reflects your personality, you as a person with work experience, with education background. So maybe in that sense the CV is more important, but everything is important altogether. If it's the first CV to an international company, what would you advise to do first? Well, if it's to an international company, it most likely is an application in English or in another language that's not your mother tongue. If that's the case, don't only use your friends or family members to proofread your application, also find somebody who is a native speaker of that language, because even if I think I speak somewhat okay English, I don't speak on a level as a native speaker, and neither do you, unless you are a native speaker. So if it's an application in the sense of international application in a foreign language, find somebody who can check that language for you. What questions should the interviewed person avoid and why? Or how to answer on them in case they are unavoidable? I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. You cannot avoid a question that you are asked by the interviewer, because if they ask it, right? There are some questions, as I covered earlier, about religion or about your political worldview, which you really should not have to answer unless you have no problem answering it. But if you mean which questions you should avoid to ask the employer, well, you should not make the impression that the only thing you're interested in is money. So we covered this little bit difficult question about salary expectation earlier. Maybe it shouldn't be the very first thing you ask, because then it might look like you really don't care about anything else. You don't care about the chances, the work environment, the possibilities to grow. You only care about your paycheck, which might be the most important thing for all of us, obviously, but it just doesn't look good. So if you mean it that way, then don't ask about money first. What's the first thing the employer pays attention to at the CV? Good question. Gaps. Are there any gaps? Are they explained? How long are they? Are they years? Are they months? Are they there at all? And for me personally, Is it a professional CV? Are there any formatting or misspelling issues? And as I told you, there almost always are. And if there are not, if it's you who can make it without mistakes, then you stand out. Is it important or necessary to write down your desired salary in a CV? Well, as I said, it depends on you a little bit. It depends on the employer if they already mentioned what they are willing to pay. In the CV, pretty much no. If you want to make this step at an early stage, then you should write it in your cover letter, in your application form, in your email basically, or discuss it during the job interview. Once again, I don't find it problematic to already put your salary expectation to the application itself, because if those numbers then don't match, then there is also no point to have an interview, pretty much. So if you want to ask it early or express your expectation early, do it in your cover letter or in the email, but not in the CV. What are the main things that are not proper, shouldn't be mentioned in a CV? All right, that's something we actually did not speak about yet so much. Totally inappropriate. Well, we all can think of things that are inappropriate and then has nothing to do in a job interview process, right? But I don't think any of you would ever come to the idea to mention such inappropriate things. But it depends a little bit on the job you're applying to. If you apply to a job, again, example, driver license, where the driver license is important, you should mention it. If not, you should not or don't have to mention it. One thing I see quite often in CVs is a huge list of hobbies. Sometimes it looks like people didn't know what else to put, and if you are a young person with not much work experience, you just maybe graduated from school and you don't know how to fit this one A4 paper for your CV, maybe it's all right to write about your hobbies. If it's something that's related to the job, if your hobby is languages, for instance, and languages are important to the job you apply to, very good. But if you apply to an office manager position and you write that your hobbies are swimming and reading, all right. I mean, I don't mind very much, but it really also is not so important, so I don't understand the hobby parts that much. If you have enough else to say that is actually important, that actually matters, then you can skip the hobbies. What benefits will I get from writing a good and correct CV? Well, that's pretty easy to answer. In the best case, you will get a job. But first and foremost, it will open the door to the job interview. And without that step, you probably won't get a job. So the whole application thing, the whole CV is actually only meant for making it to the interview, and everything that happens after is based on how you perform in this interview. Is it true that an employer may not hire a candidate because of an incorrect CV? Absolutely yes. The decision then is actually made at this early stage already, before even knowing the applicant, before even having a job interview, because if you send a improper CV with a lot of mistakes, with a lot of gaps, with all kind of issues, you will just never be invited to a job interview, and then you will not be hired. That's quite obvious. What is the most important information when writing a CV? Well, depends a little bit on the person who looks at it. For me personally, the work experience is the most important. Education, of course, is important too, but then again, it does not have to matter that much if you have a university degree or if you don't. If you have years of experience in a certain profession that is valuable for the job you're applying to, that is much more important than what kind of education or university or vocational school degrees you have. So work experience, if you have something to show, be sure to make it precise and to make it in a way that displays everything you have done work-wise. How to impress employers only with your CV? Well, if you only send a CV, then you're probably in Ukraine, because that's a problem I have mentioned earlier, that here in STEX we often receive applications that only consist of a CV, or only an email without a CV, or a CV without work experience or other important information. So the question is actually not possible to answer, because if you only send a CV, you will probably not impress. You have to send everything we have discussed today. Which info is forbidden in a CV? Well, there is nothing forbidden. Some things are maybe not favorable for you if you mention them, because they don't belong there. In some countries, as I said, it's uncommon to put a photo. In others, it's more common or even required, but there's nothing that's forbidden. But if you stick to the plan, to everything we have discussed today, then you should be good to go. How can we understand if the company is reliable or not? Very good question. Not exactly related to application training, but I'm happy to answer because I think it's really important for you, especially nowadays in today's day and age with all of the social media and online platforms. There are scammers, for sure. I have seen it myself on Facebook, for example, that there are some weird job applications, work from home, earn $5,000 per month with almost no effort. The first thing is really common sense. If something sounds too good to be true, looks too good to be true, then probably it isn't true. So if something is completely unrealistic, don't touch it. However, if you want to research your employer or potential new employer, of course you can Google, you can see maybe if there are any records or reviews of previous employees in job portals, LinkedIn, etc. Maybe you can find somebody who you know, who knows somebody who has worked in this company. Maybe you can just try it out and go to the job interview if you make it there and then get your own impression. Is this a real company? Do they have a real office? Do they look reliable? But yeah, it's a relevant question, and once again, stay away from online scams. If it looks too good to be true, it isn't true. How did you make up your mind that exactly this type of occupation suits you? Oh, it's directed to me, I guess. Well, I don't know. Well, I can answer it more generally. If you don't try out and if you don't find out, then you will never know. Because I have done different things actually in the past. By my initial education, I'm a banker. I have been working in banks. I have different bank degrees. But at some point, I just figured out it's not for me and wanted to do something else. And then I have been doing different things over the course of the years, and now I am where I am, and that's actually something I can only advise you to do. Don't stick to something you don't like to do. You spend way too much time at work, and if you at some point figure out this is not the right thing for me anymore, try something else. You can always go back, most probably, but the worst thing you can do is to stick to something for 40 years that you actually hate, and we don't live long enough for that to waste our time like this. Does it influence the interview result, being nervous, being afraid to answer simple questions, though you know you're a valuable colleague or professional? Well, of course, if you can't say a word, if you're so nervous or stressed that you are completely freaking out or, you know, can't be yourself whatsoever, then it will be difficult to hire you. Then again, a little bit of nervousness is normal. Who isn't nervous doesn't take it seriously. And everybody who is on the other side of the table as a hiring manager knows that. So we all have seen people crying, people don't finding the right words, or are just disappointed with themselves because they wanted to perform better. It's normal to a certain extent. I myself, I haven't been in job interviews as an applicant for many, many years, so I would be nervous too, I guess. But the only thing that really helps is practice. So nobody will be perfect at their first or second job interview. It's probably also unlikely that the first job interview you go, you will get the job. Some people manage to do so. I know some personally. But then again, if you have been to 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 job interviews at some point, you will know the drill and you will be more relaxed. And that's all I can advise you to just try and take it easy. Which steps should be taken to reduce stress? It's a similar question. It's a personal thing, you know. Some people, I don't know, need to drink a tea or smoke a cigarette or, I don't know, have some meditation session before the interview. But then again, just, you know, the interviewer is also just a human. We all understand each other, and there's no need to be extremely nervous that much, but I know it's easier said than done. Interview rescheduled by employee. Is it a bad point? However, is it going to affect your decision? Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a good point. So if we agree on an interview, ideally you should make it. Then again, everybody must understand that there can be situations where you can't make it. Now it depends. If you announce your rescheduling request an hour after the interview should have started, then you probably don't need to ask for rescheduling anymore. But if you have a family emergency or whatever, or you don't feel well, if you give a reasonable prior notice and not just 5 minutes before, then it should be okay to reschedule, but then again, if possible, try to avoid that. Which aspects do you pay attention to while interviewing another candidate? All right, I'm not sure what means another candidate, but then again, this is a live session. I have to take it as it comes. I pay attention to the things we have mentioned today in this workshop, and yeah, I don't know, maybe if you want, you can specify your question in the comment section, and I try to get back to you later. Is there any difference between on and offline interviewing? Seems like face-to-face talk, experienced employer HR may notice much more details in behavior of the potential candidate and is able to estimate him or her not only based on stories. Very good question, something I did not speak about today, but actually it is a question of our time, right? We have been living in this pandemic situation for, what is it, 1.5 years now or so, and online interviews via video link or Skype or Teams or whatever are much more common today due to these reasons, but they have been available also before that time. I mean, if you're not in the same city, if you're not maybe even in the same country, then it's quite difficult to arrange an in-person meeting, and it's not that necessary. So it's totally fine to have a video interview, maybe for the first step, maybe there will be a second interview in person, but of course, if possible, in person for us, for our side, is always better, and I also think for your side, because then again, you see the offices, you see the premises, you see the people who work there, and for all sides, it should be always better to meet in person if possible, and definitely it's easier to evaluate a candidate if you see the real person rather than just a video link. What is the most optimal age to start career? Tell about your own experience. All right, I mean, I'm not shy to tell about my own experience, and somehow it happens that I mostly know people who have chosen or gone through the same path as I did. I started working at the age of 16, that's a long time ago, and I only later acquired higher education, basically part-time while I was working. And I think for me personally and for many others that I know, this was a very good choice and a very good way to go, because if I think of some of my friends that went to high school and then right after to university and did the bachelor's and the master's, they maybe were 24, 25, 26 years old when they had the first job. But I had already 10 years of work experience at the time, and I might have even earned more money than them at the time when they acquired their higher education degree. So I'm not against education, don't get me wrong. If you want to be a doctor, if you want to be a lawyer, you have to obviously go to university and study these things. But what you shouldn't do is just go to university because everybody else is doing it, and although you don't know what you want to do. I quite often meet people in job interviews or otherwise, and I ask them, why did you study whatever you're studying? And just, yeah, because it was available, or that's where I got in. So in my opinion, it's better to start as early as possible, get work experience, and whatever comes to education, you can always do that later on in a part-time or evening scenario whatsoever. But it's a personal thing, people are different. How much time is needed to realize that this specific occupation suits you or doesn't suit you at all? Well, you can answer this question from both perspectives, from the employer's perspective and from the employee's perspective. So usually there is a probation period, right? It might be 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, depending on the country or on the contractual agreements you have. So the probation period should be actually the time that is enough to understand for both sides, is this a suitable match or not? Are you the right person for this job? And is this the right job for you as a person? At least for the basics. Of course, it's not enough 3 or 4 or 6 months to become a real professional in a certain job, and also your desires and ideas might change over time. So it's not easy to answer it in a standard way, but I would say after the probation period, you should have at least an idea if this is what you want to continue with, and so should the employer. That's what it meant for. But then again, in 10 or 5 or even 3 years, you might have completely different ideas what you want to do with your career, and then you might have to switch to something else. Can I use a private leisure photo for my CV? Absolutely not. We have covered it. I don't know if this, maybe you sent that question in very early, but no, please don't. In this case, it's even better to add no photo. I don't want to see your last beach vacation in Mallorca or wherever you went. No private leisure photos. It must be professional application photos, ideally from a professional photographer. Is it better to send an application by post or by email? Yeah, times are changing, and 10 years ago still, it was maybe more common still to send it on paper, in written, unless it was specified otherwise. Today I would say the opposite. Unless in the job ad it's particularly said that you have to send a paper application with the post, then you should do it email-wise, because that's just the standard and common form nowadays. It's cheaper, you don't have to print anything out, you don't have to pay any postage fee, the employer doesn't have to send anything back to you, so email unless otherwise specified that it has to be on paper. All right, and now the last question, as I notice here, should I contact the employer by phone after the application and ask about the status of my application? Also, very good question. I'm happy to have this question here at the end, because that's also something we didn't cover yet in my speech, in my workshop. Should you do that? Well, there is no harm in doing it. And I personally always try to get back to every applicant, even if the application wasn't successful. Especially if somebody made it to a second step, to a job interview, you should expect to get some sort of feedback, even if you won't be hired. It's sometimes not possible to answer to everybody who sent in applications in written form or via email, because there just might be too many of them. Some are also just so unprofessional that it's not worth to spend any time on them. But then again, I also understand that you as an applicant, you want to know what's going on. You have sent your application, now a week has passed, maybe 2 weeks have passed, you haven't heard back. Most of the time, if you haven't heard back, you weren't chosen. So there isn't really a need to ask, because otherwise they would have come back to you. Again, I understand if you want to know precisely and for sure, then there is no harm in doing it, because if they don't want to invite you, what else can they do other than tell you so? So I hope that most of the employers will get back to you by themselves, if possible. If not, you can ask, but most of the time it will be no good news. So let's check once again. Yes, it was indeed the last question. I think a lot of questions were very valuable, very interesting to hear from you. Some of the things you already covered beforehand, and altogether I hope that this application training was useful for you. You can watch it back. It stays online on YouTube and on our website and all the other platforms. And of course, if you go to STEX Ukraine website, you will see the link now once again on your screen. Then you can find also the open positions that are currently available, and maybe you want to put your application skills to the test right away. Thank you so much for your time, and all the best to you.